So we always went to the director's office early. And we were leaving the director's office, walking back towards ours in the desert on a very hot morning. And when we were, there were 40 or so of these insurgent cadets that were hiding behind a building that surrounded my partner and I. And they were armed. They didn't have a gun, fortunately, but they surrounded my partner and I. And I remember exactly what my partner Yamo told me, because we knew this was the attack. And, he was taller than me, he patted me on the head, and he says, "This is going to hurt, little buddy." And I said, "Yeah, it sure is." And no sooner did I say that, they reached in, they grabbed us, and they started beating us. And we were fighting, and we were fighting for our lives. And right into it, I could hear a voice from a distance yelling my name, "Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul."
Deep listening, impact beyond words. Hi, I'm Oscar Trimboli, and this is the Deep Listening podcast series designed to move you from an unconscious listener to a deep and productive listener. Did you know you spend 55% of your day listening, yet only 2% of us have had any listening training whatsoever? Frustration, misunderstanding, wasted time and opportunity, along with creating poor relationships, are just some of the costs of not listening. Each episode of the series is designed to provide you with practical, actionable, and impactful tips to move you through the 5 levels of listening. So I invite you to visit oscartrimboli.com/Facebook to learn about the 5 levels of listening and how others are making an impact beyond words. Paul Nadeau is a highly decorated former police detective, a hostage negotiator, and an international peacekeeper, and one of Canada's most highly recognised hostage negotiators. Together we'll explore the cost of not listening, and it's measured in people's lives, whether that's in the deserts of Jordan or when you're confronted by the Incredible Hulk in the middle of an icy, cold Canadian winter night. If we went back to your police training, what training did you receive in how to improve your listening while you're being trained as a police officer?
Well, I was a detective. And I would walk in if I was investigating a murder or a rape. You watch all those cop shows where the cop walks in and says, "Hey, we know you did it. Now it's time for you to tell us, all about it. We got you. This kind of stuff." But that's not reality. Reality is, if you want a confession or if you want cooperation, you walk in and you ask them to speak. You just, you give them reasons to speak, and then you listen. You encourage them. One of the greatest lessons, Oscar, I ever learned and recognized as a police officer was to recognize that the person standing or sitting across from me was more like me than they were different, which means that I really put myself into their shoes. If I was a cop telling them something, or if I was asking for their cooperation, how would I react if a police officer were speaking to me the way that I'm speaking to them?
How would you contrast the training you received around listening when it came to hostage negotiating?
They do teach you to listen. They do teach you to ask questions. And, if you've watched any good television shows or movies on hostage crises, or even if a person is in personal distress, because hostage negotiators are also crisis negotiators. But if you watch a good movie or a good television show on that topic, you'll see that the good negotiators walk in and say, "Looks like you're having a terrible day. What's going on?" It's very, very simple. And then you really listen. You really listen, and you make sure that you understand. And, a lot of times I would be talking to somebody, and if I wasn't clear, or if I thought I assumed I knew, I wouldn't do that. I'd turn around and I would say, so Oscar, if I understand you correctly, what you're asking me or what you're telling me is this. And then the receiver of that, like the moment you say, what? Or you hear this, he's asking me if he understood me correctly. Wow, I like this person. That person's really listening to me. And we don't do it enough. We think we know what the other person is experiencing or feeling, but that's based on what we might have experienced. But we're all different. I said that we are more similar than we are different. Yeah, but sometimes we react differently because of our upbringing or our circumstances, our background, whatever it is. So, to take the time to really listen, and if there's something about what they said that you don't understand, you just say, hey, if I understand you correctly, is this what you're saying? And encourage them to speak more. So if I'm talking to John, who's just taken a hostage, and I've asked him what's going on in his life, I really do want to hear what's going on in his life, because in order to connect with him, in order to get him to know me, like me, and trust me enough that we can work together at a solution, that includes a lot of asking questions, but a lot of listening. Ask the right questions and do the listening. And that's how you get cooperation in life.
Paul, you talked with example questions there that are what I would call what and how based questions. And a lot of people tend to commence conversations with questions that are around why or discovering why. And could you contrast how you would think about not just the what and the how questions, but how to either avoid or engage in questions that explore the context around why?
You don't start by asking the whys or the hows. You start by building a rapport. And that could be as simple as just talking about the weather. And we talk, about something that connects us, that we share in common. And that's such an important piece of communication, because it links people together, and it makes people get to know each other and like each other, and even in a very short period of time, maybe even trust each other. And once you establish that, and if I was doing an interrogation, I knew that happened when their body language opened, or when they started calling me by my first name, or they leaned into me. Again, I'm listening with my eyes. What's their body doing? How's their tone of voice? Now that I've got, us to, a rapport, this connection that we've made, let's get on to what we're here to discuss. So, I've gotten to know you, Oscar, in this very short period of time, and I can't understand what's going on here or what happened. So tell me, what did happen, Oscar, that night? What happened? And it's amazing, the moment they feel that connection to you, and that they believe that you're going to listen to them, the doors open. And I had about a 90% success rate in getting people to tell me the truth. I won't use the word confess, because it is a confession, but it's just, tell me what happened. What happened? And I earned that by establishing rapport.
This is a masterclass from Paul on rapport building, and he reinforces the importance of using what-based questions. Paul uses really simple, short, and neutral questions. Neutral questions have no bias in them whatsoever. If your question gets more than 7 words long, it's probably biased. So we can come back and think about some of those phrases that Paul used. My favourite one, it's so short, it's so simple, it's so neutral. He simply asks, what happened? When journalists research a story, what happened is the question they use to collect different perspectives and notice how to listen both for similarities and differences in the same story by asking the same question. What happened? That might be a great question for you to practice when you're talking to somebody who has to deal with a lot of complex and complicated information. Take them back to the beginning and ask them what happened. But these short what-based questions and how-based questions. Take me back to episode 2 when we spoke to Alan Stokes, and he discussed with me what it's like being a telephone-based suicide counsellor. I was lucky enough to visit Alan in his workplace, and I was able to sit next to him while he was taking phone calls, and he discussed with those people who dialed in what happened.
Now, when you're on the phone, it is absolutely essential to avoid lecturing someone or talking at them or making them feel like they're interrogated. But when it comes to truly hearing someone's story, truly deep listening, you need open questions. You need to empower someone to tell you what they want you to hear. So the use of the word how. How does that feel for you? How have you been able to cope? What have you been doing that's helping you through this? What would you like to see happen next? What if you had a magic wand would next week look like for you? What's your big idea and your big dream to solve this problem?
An example of an open-ended question sometimes that falls flat is the why question.
Why questions are loaded with judgment quite often. Not always, but 90% of the time. Why do you do that? Why are you asking me in that tone of voice? Why did you decide to stay with your abusive wife or husband? Why didn't you do this? As you can see in all of those questions, there's an implied judgment, an implied negativity. It's not a positive, non-judgmental approach. It's an approach that somehow comes with baggage.
How conscious are you of the questions you ask? The simplest question to ask before listening to somebody is, what would you like from me in the conversation? Sometimes they'll say, oh, look, I just need to speak it out aloud. I don't really need an answer, or I need some time to just tell you what the issues are so I can organise my thoughts in some kind of way. And sometimes they'll say, look, I just want to get thoughts out of my head and then let's discuss some ideas or solutions after that. So here is a deep listening tip. Tomorrow, keep account of when you ask questions and simply track 3 things. Which questions are why-based questions? Which questions are how-based questions? And which questions are what-based questions? For extra points, you might want to keep a track of the length of your question. But for now, the deep listening tip is keep a track of 3 questions. Track how many times you ask why-based questions, how many times you ask how-based questions, and how many times you ask what-based questions. Deep listening is about impact beyond words, and to create the kind of impact that Paul's already created in his life and will continue to create, I think all of us need to explore and listen to different people and different opinions. So if you want to understand some of your own listening biases or barriers, visit listeningquiz.com. That's listeningquiz.com, and take the 7-minute quiz, which will create a unique report tailored to you with 3 actions to help you move from a distracted listener to a deep and impactful listener. Paul has been a police officer, a negotiator, and a police trainer. In 2005, Paul was sent to Jordan to help to train Iraqi police officers.
In 2005, I was deployed to Jordan in the Middle East on a peacekeeping mission. Iraq was at war, and Canada did not send soldiers. We sent peacekeepers. And I was sent as a police trainer for the Iraqi police cadets at the Jordanian International Police Training Center. So my job was to teach about 55 police cadets aged from about 16 to about 65 for 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, I'd get another 55. And I was going to teach them criminal investigations, human rights, and report taking, that kind of stuff. So I decided, again, I didn't understand the Middle East as much as I do now back then, and I worried about how I would be received and how, what dangers I might be walking into. But I decided that I was going to treat everybody the way that I wanted to be treated. So what I would do is every 2 weeks that I had my class, I'd start off with a speech. And my speech would be something like, my name is Paul Nadeau. I'm a police officer, and I have some knowledge that I want to share with you. First of all, I want to tell you what an honor it is for me to be here with you and how much I appreciate this. And over the next 2 weeks, I will be sharing some information with you, not telling you what to do, but I'll be sharing with you some techniques that I hope you'll be able to use, as you enforce the law in your country. Now, as much as you may be hearing from me, I want to hear from you, because I don't understand, what's going on here. And I don't understand what your personal lives are right now. But boy, I would really like to get to know you guys, because I would really like to get to know what's going on. So how about we do this? How about we make this class a sharing experience? And that speech was always well received. And I followed through. At the end of the day, I would encourage them to tell stories, and I would encourage them to sing, because I knew that these guys, man, they got up at 4:30. Imagine this, Oscar, imagine this. You've got police officers, 16 years old. They're not supposed to be 16. They're supposed to be 18. But 3,000 cadets every 8 weeks were being sent to us from Iraq, and Iraq couldn't vet them quickly enough, right? So they were getting in with false identifications, and some of them were illiterate. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. Some of them had university degrees. Some of them were being sent to us with mental illnesses already. And, they were just not being vetted quickly enough. So one of my jobs was to find the ones that needed that help and maybe get them redeployed. But for the ones that were in my class actively participating, some of these guys had never been away from home for a day. Imagine this, in the Middle East, you may live in a village and your family is your whole world. You don't have devices like the internet. You may not have anything. You might have just a small coffee stand in your village, but you have never gone on a weekend away from home. You've never been away from your family. At the end of the day, I would say, okay, now it's time for us to take 40 minutes just to unwind, guys. And who here can sing? Every class, there were about 4 or 5 singers, and they all loved it. So they would sing, and they would take these empty jugs of water, those 5-gallon jugs of water, and they would play the drums, and they would be singing and telling stories. And my language assistant was translating the stories as quickly as he could, and some of them were just amazing. Well, during one of these classes, because we had Sunnis and Shiites in the class, obviously, but we also had terrorists, because terrorists had infiltrated the academy under the guise of being police officers. And they had one mission. At some point, they were going to kill international instructors. And they were also going to kill a number of the cadets because they wanted to make headlines back then. And they still do, obviously. But one of the students that had come to my class, unbeknownst to us, was a terrorist. And in fact, he wasn't just a terrorist, he was a cell leader. And throughout the 2 weeks that he was with me, he actually connected with me. He asked a lot of questions, very intelligent questions. And I didn't suspect him as a terrorist 1 second. He would wait for me after class. He would ask me a few questions. He would nod. And he always had a bodyguard with him, and that wasn't unusual. So let's fast forward about a month later. I was now working in the advocacy and counseling division as a counselor and an advocate for the conditions of the cadets at the academy. And one young man came in to me and said, there's going to be an attack on the academy. And I can't tell you exactly when, but the cadets are gathering weapons now, and you can expect it. And it could be any day now. So we alerted our security, our academy of security. And of course, you don't get to go home when you are, in a war, or when you are in a peacekeeping mission. It's not like, hey, tomorrow's day is going to be a little bit iffy, so I'm going to stay home. No, you don't get to do that. A few days after I got that warning and I had alerted the security and everybody in the academy was aware of it, I had a Finnish partner. He and I used to get to the academy the earliest because our job was to go to the director with different reports, and we had papers that would recommend the repatriation of some of the cadets for a number of different reasons, whether it was violence or whether it was suicidal tendencies. So we always went to the director's office early. We were leaving the director's office, walking back towards ours in the desert on a very hot morning. And when we were, there were 40 or so of these insurgent cadets that were hiding behind a building that surrounded my partner and I. And they were armed. They didn't have a gun, fortunately, but they surrounded my partner and I. And I remember exactly what my partner Yalmo told me, because we knew this was the attack. And, he was taller than me, patted me on the head, and he says, "This is going to hurt, little buddy." And I said, "Yeah, sure is." And no sooner did I say that, they reached in, they grabbed us, and they started beating us. And we were fighting for our lives. Right into it, I could hear a voice from a distance yelling my name, "Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul, Mr. Paul." And, he yelled something in Arabic, and I couldn't understand. I didn't have my language assistants with me. But what he yelled put a stop to the attack immediately, and all the men moved away from us. We were both injured, my partner and I, and my head was a little bit, spinning from that. And when I was able to focus and look and hear the voice of the man who had called my name, he came up to me and I recognized him. He was my former student, the one that took an interest and waited for me after class. And it turned out that he was the cell leader, and he had just given an order not to kill us. And he let us go free that day. And I'm alive because a terror saved my life. And when I tell that story, people are in awe. And I attribute a lot of that to the way that I treated my cadets with dignity and respect, but also by really listening and encouraging them to speak.
I imagine you and this cell leader, as you explained, were sitting on a bench having a conversation, and you mentioned that he was asking questions, and you mentioned that the questions were quite intelligent. I'm curious the kinds of questions he was asking you as you were developing that rapport outside of the classroom.
Why are you different than the other instructors? And they had some instructors that weren't treating them very well. And he wondered why, I was talking a little bit different and I was behaving a little bit different. So he was curious about Canada. He was curious about me. The questions were not so much about my political position or understanding, although that did come up. He said, "What do you think of this?" And again, not knowing all the answers or having very, very little information, I had to ask him, "Why don't you tell me what this is about? Tell me what this is about, because I would like to understand, from your point of view. I don't know enough to be able to sit here intelligently and tell you what I think, because I don't know enough." And I didn't. We talked about our families. Turns out he had 2 children as well. And he had he had a wife that he loved very much, and he was caring for his parents. So, the conversation, sitting there having coffee after class was really, building rapport. And a lot of it was at first me asking him, because he at first, asked me, what do you think about all this? And I said, "Why don't you tell me what this is all about?" So the conversations, we became, we became friendly with one another. Let's put it that way. I thought he was a nice student, and it turned out, that he was a cell leader, but he wasn't recruited for the, a lot of people think that this is something that you join up, like, hey, I'm going to become a terrorist because I believe in a war of some type. That wasn't the case with this man. I come to find out that he was given an ultimatum. It was either he can, do a mission for his cell, or they killed his whole family.
Working with some people here in Australia, one of the fascinating conversations I had recently was Well, the importance of listening to violence, and violence is the ultimate cry for people who aren't being heard.
I've listened to violence, and I've questioned, what it is that led to this violence. In my long-standing career, I had 31 years. I was a detective, polygraph examiner, and I got to interrogate and interview a lot of people. And some of those people were gang members, bikers, killers, molesters. And when I got in and really, used the techniques that you are teaching and that we're talking about here today, and that I understand, when I got them talking, it amazed me that in so many of those instances, Oscar, the reason they did what they did or joined the gang that they did or whatever it was they weren't heard at home. There was a disconnection. They weren't listened to at school. They fell through the cracks. There wasn't somebody there to care for them. We are a social species. We need and depend on each other. That's what we need. We need to be heard. Everybody needs to be heard. So imagine you are not being heard at home. When your cries are going unanswered, or you're not being encouraged, how's your day? No, really, how is your day going? And I really want to know, or you're going through something. So I remember talking to bikers who would actually break down and cry and say, you're the first person who's listened to me. Like you're the first person to treat me this way. Not even their gang members were helping, in that way. But they were drawn to the gang because the gang welcomed them. They were being acknowledged. And, the bikers, the gang members, it's like a family. They need to belong somewhere.
Deep listening is about creating an impact beyond words, and to create the kind of impact that Paul's created and continues to create, you need to embrace and listen to different people and different opinions. If you want to understand some of your own listening biases, barriers, then visit listeningquiz.com. That's listeningquiz.com, and take the 7-minute listening challenge quiz, and we'll create a unique report just for you with 3 tailored actions to help you move from a distracted listener to a deep and impactful listener. Coming up next, Paul takes us back to his early days as a police officer, where he meets the Incredible Hulk in the middle of an icy cold Canadian night.
I remember being a young officer, again, screams for violence and listening, to violence. I was called to an unknown problem one very cold October night. It was about 2:00 in the morning, and I was a single man, unit dispatched to an unknown problem. And it turned out that when I got there, it was a residential neighborhood, high-rise buildings all around. There was an ambulance at the side of the road, and 2 ambulance attendants were sitting down. This was 1979, 1980 maybe. And the ambulance attendants were sitting down, and they had just been assaulted by a man. And they said, well, good, you're here. We're leaving. And that's him. He's going through some fit because he says he's got a migraine, but he just assaulted us, and we're leaving. We're not taking him. And they said, oh, by the way, do you have any backup coming? And I said, yes, I do. And they said, well, good, you're going to need it because that's Jimmy Donovan. And they pointed at this man. And I looked at this man, and I'm not kidding, about 6'2", 6'3", built, like very muscular, long hair, standing only in his white underwear. He's almost like he was howling at the moon, like he was holding his head and he was just in pain. And the ambulance attendants were true to their word. They got into the ambulance and they left, leaving me standing in the middle of the road, about 10 or 15 feet away from my cruiser, and about 10 feet away from him. And they had warned me that he was a very violent man and that I was going to need that backup. So while I'm standing there as an inexperienced cop, deciding what I'm going to do, I thought, okay, well, I can't run to the car because training has told me that if I run, he's going to pounce on me. I just won't be fast enough to get into the car. So I'm just going to gently move backwards while I'm watching him and, ease into my car, lock the door, and wait for backup. Well, good plans sometimes don't always turn out the way that you want. Sure enough, my radio goes off about that time, and this big hulk of a man spotted me and turned around, and he did one of those, I don't know if you saw Thor Ragnarok or whatever, where the Hulk clenches his fists when he's fighting with Thor and picks him up like a rag doll and just pounces him into the pavement a few times. He was like a bull and I was like a matador, and he was about to pounce on me. And the only thing I could think of was, putting my hands up, with my palms open, the sign that I mean you no harm. And I just said, you look cold. Why don't I get you a blanket? So I went to the back of my police cruiser and I got him a blanket and I put him around him. And I said, listen, the ambulance attendants are not coming back. Why don't you sit in the front of the cruiser with me and I'll take you to the hospital? And he didn't say a word. When he got into my cruiser, remember this was a cold night and all he was wearing was his white underwear. When he got into my cruiser, I had the heat going and it obviously soothed him. He put his head down and he started crying. And, so I called in my position and I let the dispatcher know where I was going. And of course, I got all kinds of warnings from the coppers who were on the air jumping over each other saying, hey, he's going to kill you. He's dangerous. Wait for backup. Wait for us. I drove to the hospital, which was a couple of miles away, got us a private room and, just waited for the doctor. He and I started to talk. He started to talk and we were actually having a fairly pleasant conversation. I didn't know at the time that this guy had served, many years in the Kingston Penitentiary, for attempted murder. I didn't know the list of violent crimes that this man had committed. I had no idea who it was. I just knew that he was. I could see by the scars on his face and on his body. He'd been in a few fights. And, I had been told by the ambulance attendants and also by the coppers who were warning me that this was a very violent man. But we were actually chatting. And about 5 minutes after I get to the hospital, the door swings open in this waiting room, this small private waiting room that Jim and I were in. And in burst about 4 cops trying to get into the doorway at the same time. One guy had his billy club out. One guy had his gun out, and the other 2 were just trying to squeeze through. And I imagine they wanted to get a piece of Jim, for what he may have done to them, because I come to find out it takes about 7 cops to put Jimmy down in a fight. He loves to fight. He was missing teeth. He was good at it, and he just loved to fight. So these guys are trying to squeeze their way into the room. Jimmy is sitting on a bench waiting for one of those examination benches, waiting for the doctor to come in. He jumps up, throws the blanket off him, does his Hulk impression, and these cops finally squeeze in through the door. And I'm standing in the middle of these 2 warring gangs. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is not going to go well. So the first thing I did was I yelled and I said, Jimmy, sit down. And I said, as for you guys, you get the heck out of here. If I need you, I'll call you. I don't need you. Just leave now. I'll keep my radio on. And they reluctantly left the room. Doctor came in, he examined Jim. And Jim and I left, and I brought him home. It was about 3:30 in the morning, and I brought him home. And he turns around to me and he says, you know what, Paul? He says, you are one of the nicest cops I've ever met. And he says, do you want to come and meet my fiance? It's 3:30 in the morning, Oscar. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, okay. Now, Jimmy wasn't the most handsome man. I think at one time he was, before he got his teeth, knocked out and before he got all these scars on his face. But I figured, okay, and at the time I was going to church, and I'd already mentioned to Jimmy, I said, listen, if ever you want to come to church, and I don't know what possessed me to do that, but I did. Anyways, I said, if ever you want to come to church, I'd be happy to take you. So at 3:30 in the morning, I am going up this elevator with Jim, and I'm imagining in my mind that he's not a good-looking man. I'm wondering what his fiance might look like. Well, was I ever surprised to see that the door was answered by a very beautiful, soft-spoken woman wearing a dress. I still remember the dress vividly. And she looks at me and she says, thank you, officer, for bringing my Jimmy home. And I said, you're welcome. So they had my telephone number and I left, never thinking that I was going to hear back from them. And then about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from his fiance saying, hey, is that offer to go to church still open? And I said, sure it is. And so I picked them up, and she looked exquisite, and I had no doubt she would. And Jim looked fantastic. His hair was washed. He had a 3-piece suit on, albeit that had a couple of holes in it, but he had the biggest grin on his face, and he looked happy. We went to church, and the pastor greeted us and made Jimmy and his fiancée feel very, very welcomed. But unfortunately, after church, nobody came up to Jim, and nobody said hello to him or his fiancée or to me. And I was a regular member there, and everybody liked me. I think they looked at Jim, and the word got around that he was a hardened criminal, and nobody wanted to risk saying hello. Well, this happened about 4 weeks in a row. Every week, Jim would have the same 3-piece suit on, and his girlfriend was looking amazing. We would go. The pastor would welcome us. After church, I'd wait around for a few minutes. Not one person came over to say hello. After that 5th week, Jim said, "Sorry, Paul." He says, "We're not coming back." And I said, "Yeah, I understand." And we remained friends. Like, I dropped in to see him for coffee, and we'd see each other once in a while. Then he left. He went to, about a year after that, he went to the West Coast. It was about 2 years after that happened that I got notification, as did our police department, that Jim died in a gun battle with the police. And when I look back at that whole thing, I wonder how different his life would have been if somebody had come to him and made him feel welcomed and welcomed him into a new family.
Thanks for sharing that story.
That was a sad story.
I'm glad you took the extra time.
Thank you. That one, it still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it, because he had become a friend, and he had so much potential. And the smile on his face, Oscar, when he first came to church wearing that old 3-piece suit of his. But boy, it was a smile on it, and that smile made him so handsome. It really did. And I could see that he was just, shouting on the inside, "Come," and one of the things that really upset me about that too was that in this church that I was going to was a man who was once like Jimmy, and he had found a family in that church and turned things around, and he didn't even acknowledge Jimmy, although they had ran in the same circles years before. I just don't get it, and I didn't get it.
Do you listen for similarities, or do you listen for difference? When we operate from our default listening orientation, we listen for similarities. We seek out what's common, what's familiar to us. And Paul explained this so well when he talked about his work with having a coffee with the Iraqi trainee police officers in Jordan. They were seeking to find mutually common things, and he talked about families and children and the day-to-day experiences that we all share in common. He did this with me when he asked me about the weather. Deep listening moves us away from default listening. It moves us away from autopilot listening. Deep listening helps us to notice, acknowledge, and appreciate difference. Paul did this so well when he listened to people from different backgrounds and even from different sides of the law. How do you listen for differences? For me, each Sunday morning, I set aside 2 hours while I walk, and this is 2 hours where I listen to completely different perspectives from me, whether they're podcasts or catch-up TV, and I listen to opinions that I know I'll probably disagree with. I have to remind myself, listening is the willingness to have your mind changed. And if we only listen for what's common, what's similar, our impact will be limited only to what we know. Deep listening is about impact beyond words, and to create the kind of impact that Paul's already created in his life and will continue to create, I think all of us need to explore and listen to different people and different opinions. So if you want to understand some of your own listening biases or barriers, visit listeningquiz.com. That's listeningquiz.com, and take the 7-minute quiz, which will create a unique report tailored to you with 3 actions to help you move from a distracted listener to a deep and impactful listener. Thanks for listening.